I have identical twin boys, and because of the nature of my pregnancy, the doctors told me the eggs split very late after a few days. Since life begins at conception and life started before the egg split, how many souls were in the egg before it split? One or two? And there's a note. Aaron asked if we would say hi to her identical twin boys, Oliver and Alexander. Hi, Oliver and Alexander.
Yeah. Hi, Oliver and Alexander. Hope y'all are doing great. So the answer is the church doesn't have a teaching on this, but there is a partial answer that can be given based on philosophical principles. Going back to the time of the Greek philosophers, the soul has been understood as the life principle of the body. It's the substantial form of the body. So anytime you've got a body, you've got a soul. That's what keeps it alive. As James 2 says, the body without the spirit is dead. So anytime you got a body, you got a soul or a spirit. Now, in the case of pregnancy, technically speaking, the egg or ovum precedes the pregnancy. It then has to be fertilized in order to become an embryo, the first stage of which is a zygote, a single-celled organism. And so if you have a zygote, you've got a living body. It's a one-celled organism. It has a complete genetic code. So it has it is an entity in and of itself, distinct from the mother. And so it is a complete body and therefore will have a soul or spirit if this philosophy is correct, which Christian thought has basically accepted. So we would say that from the single-celled stage onward, there is a spirit. Now the question then becomes, what happens when that early pre-embryo divides and becomes two embryos, which then grow up to be identical twins? Well, there are basically two possibilities. The first possibility is that when the embryo divides, the original entity ceases to exist, ceases to be alive, in which case two new souls would come into existence because you now have two bodies that therefore have two souls. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that the original entity doesn't cease to exist, it doesn't die, but one body buds off of the original entity, in which case you have a second new entity with a second new soul, and the original entity just keeps going with its own original soul. So it's possible that in this situation there are either two souls or three souls. It could be that there's the soul of the original entity, which died, and then there are the two new souls that became the identical twins. Or it's possible that there are only two souls, that there's the original entity whose soul goes forward, and there is a second soul that comes into existence when the twin buds off of the original entity. So those are the options. We don't know which is the case, and that's something that could be debated by Catholic philosophers. But unless this philosophical approach is fundamentally mistaken, there would not be a case where you've got one entity with two souls. Every entity has one substantial form that makes its body alive, and so you wouldn't ever have a two-soul embryo. Only a one-soul embryo, and the question then is, how many one-souled embryos do you have, and how did they come about?
Aaron, an excellent weird question for Jimmy Akin to get us started with. We've got lots more weird questions coming up right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features texts of daily Mass, prayers, articles, meditations, art commentaries, and more in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church on the web at magnificat.com.
Proclaiming the faith, changing lives.
The year was 1981. The FCC license to operate a satellite Earth station, the first ever given to an order of nuns, was granted to Our Lady of the Angels Monastery. Mother Angelica flips the switch and EWTN begins transmitting from Irondale, Alabama.
To learn more about Mother Angelica's life and the history of EWTN, visit EWTN.com/Mother Angelica.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live, and that music means it's Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin. And Jimmy gets a lot of weird questions because he's got a reputation for, well, he does this weird thing where he answers them. He takes them seriously and answers them, which gives us a great deal of fun here. So I won't be giving out the phone number. I'll just be reading the question. And this one comes from Deacon Jason's daughter. And Deacon Jason's daughter wants to know, she says, I am just a few months away from my 18th birthday. That's an exciting day, except that it also happens to be...
I love the deadpan reading you're giving. That's an exciting day.
I gotta work on my reading of these. That is an exciting day, except that it also happens to be Ash Wednesday. I was born around 7 a.m. Does that mean my obligation to fast doesn't begin until 7 a.m.? Oh, I see where she's going. If so, I'll look forward to a big breakfast that morning. For the record, I'm sure I'll fast anyway according to the spirit of the law, but my family has been having fun debating the question, and we would love to hear your answer.
Okay, so you're thinking along the right lines. If you look in the section on days of penance in the Code of Canon Law, it establishes the times when the duty of abstinence and the duty of fast kick in. In the case of the duty of abstinence, it's earlier in the teenage years. But in the case of fast, it says that a person who has attained their majority is obliged to fast until they complete when they turn 59. So from your 18th birthday to your 59th birthday, you got to fast, but after that, you don't got to fast. We then need to determine when a person attains their majority, and that's found in Canon 97 of the Code of Canon Law. And it says a person who has completed their 18th year of age has reached majority. Below this age, a person is a minor. Now, complete their 18th year does not mean they turn 19. It means they turn 18 because your first year is before you reach your first birthday. So, when you're 1 month old, you're in your first year. And when you're 6 months old, you're in your first year. You don't enter your second year until your first birthday. So because of that, when you complete your 18th year, that means you turn 18. Okay. Now, here we enter an interesting area because the code does not define what it means to turn 18. Do you count that from midnight, which is the normal way that days are calculated, or do you count that from the time of day that you turn 18? And that's something the code does not answer. So this is a lacuna or hole in the law. I would say that since this is a restriction on what you can do, if you're required to fast, that restricts how much you're able to eat, that it needs to be judged strictly. And that, which is another principle in canon law, that anything that restricts a person's rights and so forth, like the right to eat breakfast, has to be given a strict interpretation. And so strictly, one would go by the time of day reckoning rather than the entire day reckoning. Oh. So in my opinion, because otherwise you're restricting the person's ability before the actual point they turn 18. Mm-hmm. So I would say, in my opinion, that you're not bound to fast until 7 a.m. or whatever specific time of day you were born. And you'll need to keep fasting on Ash Wednesday and Good Fridays until your 59th birthday, at which point you can go back to eating however much food you want. But you still have to abstain from meat, because after that one triggers, it never goes away.
Deacon Jason's daughter, thank you. Thank you for an interesting question. A very specific question. I don't know how many people will have a similar circumstance, but a good one nonetheless. Thank you. This next one comes from Francis. Francis wants to know, what if Luther had worked within the church in his reformative thoughts?
Well, obviously, history would be very different. Lutheranism would not have been formed if Luther had stayed within the church, and he would have had various ideas that would have been accepted. In fact, some of Luther's reforms were accepted in the Catholic Church. Other ideas that he promoted and that later became standard in Lutheranism would have been rejected. And if Luther had stayed within the church, well, then there wouldn't be this Lutheran movement. On the other hand, that doesn't mean that nothing like the Protestant Reformation would have happened, because the Reformation is not all down to Martin Luther. There were other people involved. And so even if Luther had not been the one to launch a Reformation, it's possible that there could have been others who maybe some of the same individuals, like Calvin and Melanchthon and Bucer and people like that, who might have split off from the church anyway. So it would alter history, but that doesn't mean that Protestantism would not have come about in some form. It may have come about anyway, but exactly what would have happened once you change what happened with Luther is just really speculative. Mm-hmm. And I hesitate to speculate about alternative timelines because they can diverge so much, and there's no real way of predicting how they're going to diverge. Could have been better than the timeline we got, could have been worse than the timeline we got. One thing I think we can say with confidence is none of us who are alive today would be here, because human conception is very sensitive to initial conditions. If our parents had done anything different on the nights, or presumably nights, we were conceived, a different sperm would have united with the egg, and we wouldn't be here. And after 500 years of cascading effects from there is no Lutheranism, that would basically wipe everybody on the planet. We'd have an entirely different set of individuals living in this alternate timeline. We would not be there to see it.
That's so weird to think about. Like, you have to be, that's so weird to think about. When you think about how contingent you are, it kind of gives you a weird feeling. Francis, thank you very much for the question. This one comes from Robert. Is it possible for a human spirit to possess another person? If so, could a person engaging in astral projection possess someone while still living? For example, could I be on my couch watching TV and astrally project my spirit to possess my brother and bring myself some pretzels, hypothetically?
Okay, so let's deal with the first question first. Is it possible for a human spirit to possess another person? The answer depends on who you talk to. Maybe. In the exorcistic community, it is reported that when exorcists are doing an exorcism, on a person who's possessed by spirits, some of the spirits claim to be human. They may claim to be Judas or Nero or someone like that, not just demons. Well, how credible that is up for debate, because demons are lying liars who lie and are working for the father of lies. So you may not want to believe them if they claim to be a human. On the other hand, if a particular spirit does. On the other hand, just because a spirit might lie doesn't mean it is lying. And so some in the exorcistic community have given credence to the idea that some of these are human spirits that are possessing living people. There's also a case that I know of from 1933. Well, let me actually do another step first. If we broaden out further to consider what Jewish individuals have found, in the Jewish community, there is a phenomenon known as dibbukim. A dibbuk is a human spirit that possesses another human. And so dibbukim are another reported phenomenon within the Judeo-Christian tradition. There's also a case of a dibbuk, or what appears to be a dibbuk, occurring in 1933 in Italy in a Christian context. There was a young woman and her mother who were on their way to an event, and while they were on their way to this event, the daughter suddenly became possessed by the spirit of a man who had been murdered. And he gave enough information that his murder could be solved. He identified the killers and so forth and explained what happened. It had been made to look like he committed suicide, but he said, no, I was really murdered. It was these people. Once he had communicated that information, the mother said, will you please get the heck out of my daughter? And it said, sure, and it left. So no exorcism was needed. Now, this does not look like a demon, at least based on its behavior, because it identified as a human. It tried to do something in principle good, solve a murder. And that is consistent with how souls in purgatory sometimes have unfinished business on earth that they need to get taken care of so that they can move on in the afterlife. And, like resolving resentments and things they had, like maybe against the people who murdered them. And then when it was asked to depart, it did, which is, not what demons typically do. So this doesn't look like a demon. It doesn't look like a damned soul. It looks like maybe a soul experience in purgatory. So there is some evidence that human spirits that are in the afterlife might be able to possess a living person. And if that's the case, then it might, and I'm only saying might, be possible for the same thing to happen when a person is still alive. There are cases where people report out-of-body experiences, and sometimes their presence is even felt or seen by the people who are at the other end of where they're experiencing. I in fact know a guy who had an out-of-body experience, and he went to the house of some friends of his, and his friends saw him there. So there are other experiments that have been done of like, can you have an out-of-body experience and then pull strain gauges to demonstrate your presence at the remote location? And that's been done. So a person having an out-of-body experience could affect the environment they've gone to. Well, hypothetically, it might be possible for them to then take control of another human, like in the brother getting you some pretzels example. However, even though this might be possible, I am not at all confident of it. I am not aware of cases like this being reported. And if your brother is putting up resistance to the idea of you possessing him and getting pretzels, he might just be able to push you off, because our ability to use psychic functioning may not be the same as in this life as it is once we're detached from our bodies and no longer have their limitations.
Robert, thank you for that weird question. Right back with more Jimmy Akin.
What is the Catholic Church? Everybody seems to have an opinion, but the church never quite fits into the boxes people try to make for it. In The Faith Unboxed, author Andrew Petiprin looks at some of the most common boxes people put the Catholic Church in and explains why they don't fit. In doing so, he brings us closer to what the church really is, the institution founded by Christ. Order The Faith Unboxed today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Lots of people have big questions about Catholicism. It needs a big book of answers, and now it's got one. The Big Book of Catholic Answers is filled with helpful replies to more than 250 questions about the faith. Questions about God, salvation history, the Creed, the Bible, the list goes on and on. Order your copy of the Big Book of Catholic Answers today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Why do Catholics pray to dead people, bow to statues, venerate relics? And where do we find any of this stuff in the Bible? In the delightful book, The Saints Pray for You, Dr. Carla Broussard convincingly defends the ancient Christian belief rooted in Scripture that the saints care for us, that they're our allies. Order your copy of The Saints Pray for You today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
The stigmata, the appearance of Christ's wounds on ordinary believers. Is it real or fake? What's the evidence? And if real, what could God's reason be for causing this? In God's Wounds, author John Clark offers what may be the most thorough, honest, and faithful reckoning with the stigmata ever written, examining the evidence and making sense of it both medically and spiritually. Order God's Wounds today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. I spent the entire break trying to astrally project into Edgar so he would get me some pretzels. No effect, Edgar. Had no effect on you. You got me exactly 0 pretzels. Oh well, it was worth a try. But it's weird questions. And Jimmy Akin, well, of course Jimmy Akin's there. We would do weird questions with one of the other apologists. Jimmy Akin's here for weird questions. Weird questions with Jimmy Akin. Jimmy told you about what's on what's on the Mysterious
World.
Yeah, Mysterious World. Kenneth Arnold and his 1947 sighting. That's the one where we get the word flying saucer from.
Yes,
right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Flying saucer was coined after that incident.
But on Monday, you did a Jimmy Akin podcast. So tell me what was on that.
Okay, so this last Monday, I started what will be an occasional series on the Book of Revelation. So in this case, I talked about what the Book of Revelation is, who wrote it, and why it was written, and things like that. And then in future episodes in that series, I'm going to go into more detail about the Book of Revelation. I'm going to talk about when it was written and how we can show that. I'm going to talk about different chapters in it and what the major symbols in the book mean. So we'll be doing that on a from time to time basis. But this coming Monday, I have an episode interacting with Lutheran YouTuber Jordan Cooper. Because he issued a short recently on YouTube in which he made an argument against the idea of asking the saints for their intercession based on the idea that they would be near omniscient or almost omniscient in his words. And there's just a lot wrong with that argument. So on Monday, I'll be releasing an episode where I take Jordan's argument and we go through it and I show you all the different things that are wrong with it.
Check it out. The Jimmy Akin podcast. You can get it wherever you get your podcast, but you can also get it at Jimmy's channel on YouTube. And lots of people have been finding it and finding it very helpful. The Jimmy Akin podcast. All right, back to the weird questions we go. Dan wants to know this. If an infant can be baptized with the proper form and matter due to the faith and desire of the parents, and if an adult can be baptized by desire if the proper form is impossible, can a child who dies before being baptized receive baptism by the desire of the parent?
The answer is a definite maybe. In other words, we don't know. This idea has been proposed. It's actually been proposed for quite a while because, there have been people who've had their children, die without baptism all the way down through human history. And their parents in Christian times have been concerned for their salvation. And so there have been people who have speculated that maybe the child could have a proxy baptism of desire based on the desire of the parents for the child's baptism. Also, it's been speculated that, well, it's not just the parents who would like to see the child baptized, the church would. So maybe children who die without baptism could have a proxy baptism of desire based on the desire of the church for their baptism. So both of those are possibilities and alternatives to the idea of limbo, which is that they would not go to the full glory of heaven, but also wouldn't be punished in hell, but go to some other state that would be neither heaven nor hell. That's also been a speculation historically, and it's been the most common speculation. For a time, the church even endorsed it as a non-infallible teaching, but as a result of doctrinal development, it is no longer mandated in the Catholic Church. The Second Vatican Council taught that God makes salvation possible for every single human, even if it's in a mysterious way we can't perceive or understand. And during the reign of Pope Benedict, the International Theological Commission issued an opinion paper that was endorsed by Pope Benedict, basically saying limbo is not the only alternative. There are others, and that would include things like proxy baptism on the part of the parents or proxy baptism on the part of the church. There are other possibilities as well, like maybe if you have an infant who's about to die, God gives that infant a mysterious enlightenment that we can't see or perceive, but he enables the child to make a choice for or against him, in which case the child wouldn't need proxy baptism of desire. The child would have baptism of desire if the child chose in favor of God rather than rejecting him. So there are a number of possibilities here. We don't know which is the case, but according to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, we may confidently hope that God has provided a way of salvation for these infants.
Dan, thank you for your somewhat weird question. Actually, kind of a pretty straightforward question, Dan. Virginia wanted to know this. If someone was excommunicated from the church because they had a child out of wedlock, they married a non-Catholic who would not get an annulment, and they were not allowed to go to church because the ushers locked them out for their sin, can they still go to heaven? If this person was still dedicated to God and loved the Catholic faith and desired to go to church but not allowed, then what happens to them? The church of the 50s was cruel to some people and cost the church generations of followers.
Okay, so this one is a little specific to be hypothetical. I have the feeling that Virginia Mary Ellen is talking about a real incident. And if that's the case, I just want to extend my sympathies, because this is not something, number one, because this is a really tragic situation to be in. And number two, because the church does not want anyone to feel like they're not welcome. The church wants to find ways to help people in their situations and reconcile with God and with his church. I suspect that some of the details, like ushers literally, I suspect the ushers probably didn't literally lock the doors, and it wouldn't have been the ushers' decision anyway. It should have been the pastor's decision in a given parish. But I know things like this have happened. In terms of the basic question, if the person is still dedicated to God and loves the Catholic faith and desires to go to church and wants to go to heaven, yes, God can find ways to make that happen, to make that work. Hope is never lost. As long as there is life, there is hope. And if God knows the person's situation, he knows the factors they're dealing with. But the good news I would want to deliver is that if this is an ongoing situation that has not been reconciled, it can be reconciled. There are ways to deal with this. And the starting point for that would be to talk to the pastor at the local parish and explain the situation and say, here's what happened, but I really want to come back to the active practice of my faith. What can we do to make that happen? Now, there are different paths that might be used to make that happen. One path that might happen, and this is one of the worst case scenarios, but it might be necessary to live as if the two civil spouses are still alive, they might need to live as brother and sister. But if they got married in the 50s, I mean, that's 70 years ago. And if they were adults then, they would probably be in their 90s at least now. And living as brother and sister in your 90s is not the burden it would be to live as brother and sister in your 20s. But at the worst, they could live as brother and sister and return to the active practice of the Catholic faith. And that's a worst case scenario. There are better outcomes that are also possible and available, but the first step in pursuing those is having a conversation with the local pastor.
Virginia, I hope that was helpful to you. Thank you very much for the question. That'll take us right to the break. We'll take a quick break and be back with lots more weird questions for Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Hello, this is Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone of San Francisco. Keep your dial tuned to Catholic Answers Live.
In Morse code, the sequence SOS is a distress call. It's been said that it stands for Save Our Souls. Well, right now our world is in big trouble, and we're putting out an SOS call for help. Will you answer that call? St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, has hundreds of teams who share the good news with souls who don't know Jesus. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to get involved.
Another weekend means another chance for us to build our community of faith on this weekend's Catholics Coast to Coast. I'm Ace McKay and invite you to join me as we highlight the conversations happening. Go to Podcast Central at EWTN.com/radio. That way you can take them with you, share them, like, subscribe, follow, whatever you need to do so you don't miss future episodes. So join me for Catholics Coast to Coast tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. It is a mysterious world, and Jimmy spends a good deal of his time exploring it. He's the podcaster behind Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, as well as being a long time Catholic apologist. And sometimes we get the chance to just gather up the weird questions that come to Jimmy and ask him of him on the air. And that's what we are doing right now. Before I go to the next question, I got to read this ad from Carrie, and it has one little phrase in it that I am not sure is correct, but that I hope is correct. Here's the ad. Do you want to learn how to talk about Jesus with anyone? Get your copy of this runaway bestseller now at shop.catholic.com. It's just $10 a copy, plus free shipping if you live in the United States. The offer expires Sunday at midnight Honolulu time. Go to shop.catholic.com and get your copy of How to Talk About Jesus with Anyone for just $10 and free shipping this weekend. Though it's just the phrase runaway bestseller. I feel like I'm not aware of that. I hope that is the case, but
I was once, when I was a kid, I was reading a science fiction magazine. It may have been Starlog, or it was a magazine like that anyway. And this was in the mid to late 70s. It was after Star Wars, but before the TV series Battlestar Galactica.
Okay, yeah.
The original Battlestar Galactica, the campy one. And I remember seeing an ad in Starlog, I think it was Starlog, for Battlestar Galactica, and it referred to it as like a hit TV show. And I'm going, it hasn't even debuted yet. Come on.
Yeah, right. Yes, maybe this is aspirational. The runaway bestseller. Yeah. Maybe that's aspirational language. Anyway, from your mouth to God's ears, as they say, Carrie, or from your typewriter. typewriter, like anybody's using a typewriter. I'm sorry, Jeff. I apologize. That offends your entire computer profession, from your keyboard to God's ears. All right, on we go. We got another good, weird question from Ryan. And he says, I'm a big fan of Mysterious World and thrilled to see you hit 100,000 YouTube subscribers. Wah, wah. Congratulations. He didn't put the wah, wah in there. I did.
Yeah, I'm glad you perked it up there, because originally I am a big fan of Mysterious. You started deadpan, but then you redeemed it.
I did so quite consciously, thinking, "Oh, Jimmy's going to stop my read on this one."
I almost did.
But 100,000 was a while ago, though. You're well.
Yeah,
past
I'm like
109,000
or something like that now.
All right. So Ryan says this. In your recent Weird Questions episode with Cy Kellett, you discussed humans and angels falling from grace. This prompted a few follow-up questions. Since demons and incarnate human souls exist in time, is it possible for a damned spirit or soul to change its orientation toward God and be redeemed? If not, why not? Why would such mercy, such as the sacrament of confession, be available only to the living? I'd appreciate your insights on these questions. Thank you and Dom for all your hard work. And of course, that's Dom Bettinelli.
Yeah. Okay. So we actually have an answer to the first question on the part of demons, because the Catechism addresses it. If you read paragraph 393 of the Catechism, it says, it is the irrevocable character of their choice, meaning the fallen angel's choice. It is the irrevocable character of their choice and not a defect in the infinite divine mercy that makes the angel's sin unforgivable. And so the Catechism is saying God would forgive them if they repented, but they made an irrevocable choice and they don't want to repent. They're not going to change that choice. It then has, now that deals with angels, but it then has a quote from St. John Damascene, which also touches on the situation of men. And it says, quote in John Damascene, there is no repentance for angels after their fall, just as there is no repentance for men after death. So they're not going to repent after death. So it seems that, and why God did this, we don't know. It's something people can speculate about. But it seems that God has given what's sometimes called a probationary stage to both humans and angels, where they can make a free choice for or against God. In the case of angels, you know, they are in time, but they don't necessarily experience it the way we do, but they are in the afterlife, in the spirit world. And it seems that when they make a choice, it's fixed. They either choose for God and their choice is fixed, or they choose against God and that choice is fixed. With humans, it's different. Here in this life, we're able to choose for or against God and go back and forth between the two. We can fall into sin and then repent, and then fall into sin and repent. And it's not till the end of our life that our final choice becomes fixed. And once we enter the spirit world, our choice is fixed also, either for or against God. The angels haven't always been in the spirit world. Their first choice was fixed. So the reason that they can't change the choice, either human or angels, is because of the fixity that attaches to the will in the spirit world. Exactly why that is, we don't know. It's something that can be speculated about. But it's not that God wouldn't forgive people if they did repent. He would, but they don't want to repent. And they're not going to change in that. And why they're not going to change in that, why the decision has become fixed, is mysterious. But the flip side is, if our choice is fixed in the spirit world and you chose for God, you don't got to worry about falling again. It's not like you're going to be in heaven in a 1,000 or 1,000,000 years from now. You get tempted and are going to fall. So you don't have to worry about losing your salvation either.
I like that part. Ryan, thanks. Appreciate the question. This next one is, I get to do some reading here. This one comes from Liam. And Liam says, I just want to follow up with this question because although I watched the episode on aliens and religions, I think
that would be episode 55 of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World.
Okay. I think it still fails to sufficiently touch on the underlying theme or problem I am encountering more and more lately. Essentially, we as humanity are increasingly learning that we are not the center of the universe. Scientifically, the distinction between us and the other animals has become rather blurry, and we are increasingly learning how small we are on a cosmic scale in terms of space and time. I'd say this general feeling of existential insignificance is the underlying philosophical problem below the superficial argument that science disproves religion. The Christian and religious claim is that we were created as special creatures with a specific role and relationship with God, but scientific evidence seems to indicate that we are not altogether special, distinct, or significant. I'm aware that this does not logically contradict the Christian claim, but it nonetheless is evidence, in quotes, of a sort against it, so that it has been something that I have been wrestling with a lot recently and something that I have not found a good response to. I am hoping to reach out to Jimmy because as far as I am aware, he is he is one of the only Catholics who have been honestly examining these questions.
Yeah, well, I am interested in science, and that includes, astronomy and cosmology and evolution, biological sciences, and so I do think about these questions. And like anything else, I try to be honest about them. I think that it's correct that we are in a larger universe than we thought we were. Because in the ancient conception, the universe extended just past the sphere of Saturn, because you couldn't see any planets beyond that. Saturn was the last planet you could see with the naked eye, and it was thought that the stars are on a sphere that's just beyond the orbit of Saturn. So the universe seemed like a much smaller place at that time, and we've now found out it's much bigger. I don't think that that's too big of a change, though, because even if you imagine the universe stopping past the sphere of Saturn, you're still going to imagine infinite space beyond that. The human mind is not designed to think of finite space. And so even if our pocket of the universe had turned out to just be beyond Saturn, humans still envisioned a much bigger space that sat within. And so I don't think the fact we're in a bigger universe is particularly significant. Then there's the fact that we're not at the center of the universe, or at least so far as we know, we're not at the center, because we can't. It was assumed when you had the Saturn-based cosmos, the small one, it looked like Earth was at the center of that sphere. Well, today, and they thought they could see the edge of the universe, the sphere of the fixed stars. Now we know that's not a sphere, and the stars are at all kinds of different distances. And today, we can't see an edge. So as far as we know, there isn't a center to the universe. And if there is, we don't know that we're at it. So we have been dislocated in that sense. And that one's a little more substantive, but I understand why people thought we were at the center. It was because it looks like we're at the center. It looks like there's a sphere of fixed stars out there that make up the constellations, and that sphere seems to be equidistant from Earth, no matter which direction you look. So it looks like Earth is at the center. But that turned out to be wrong. So, okay, no big deal to my mind. Then there's the idea that humans are different from animals. Well, they are. Human animals, and it's always been recognized that humans are animals. The Greek philosophers recognized that, and even the Bible, the book of Genesis, puts man on the same in the same part of physical creation as the animals. So yeah, they're different than us. You'll find humans building skyscrapers. You're not going to find any other animal building skyscrapers. Termites might make little structures, but not skyscrapers. Birds might sing songs, but they don't write symphonies. Prairie dogs may have a language sophisticated enough to warn other prairie dogs about an approaching predator, but they don't write War and Peace. And so humans have abilities that are similar to animals, but we just take them and do amazing, incredible things with them that nobody else is capable of doing. So there is, just speaking, and I've seen, biologists like Robert Sapolsky, who is an atheist, give talks about how humans take some abilities that animals have and just go crazy with them and do things that are completely, unlike the way animals use these same skills. So even, any fair look at biology acknowledges that humans are different from animals. We're also similar to animals. We're similar to them in some ways. We're different from them in other ways. It's not surprising that as biology has matured as a science, that we would find more similarities than we were previously aware of, but it still hasn't eliminated the fundamental difference between them and us. Then there's what Liam refers to about our relationship with God. And you can approach that question from one of two perspectives, either from a faith-based perspective or a reason-based perspective. Well, reason, especially the form of reason known as natural science, is not capable of detecting God. I mean, philosophical reason can deduce there is a God, but that's about as much as philosophical reason can do. When you look at natural science, which is a sub-form of reason, it is not capable of detecting God. So the natural sciences perspective is not going to tell us anything one way or another about do we have a special relationship with God or not. On the other hand, the faith perspective indicates we do have a special relationship with God, and nothing in the natural sciences contradicts that. So I think that these questions are worth thinking about, and I think that our knowledge from the sciences is helping us out and helping us appreciate the natural world, including the animal kingdom, better than we did before. I've also, talked about that on Mysterious World. Like I did a whole episode about evidence that animals may have an afterlife. That's something that many Christians have speculated about. And we actually have some empirical evidence from near-death experiences that animals may also have an afterlife. I believe it's episode 203. It's either 203 or 206. But you can check that out for more. And so even though we're learning more stuff, I think that's cool. And I don't find it threatening to my Christian faith at all.
Liam, I have to say, I was very impressed with the way that question was worded. He's very made very clear distinctions between proof and evidence, and the sense that this doesn't comport with that. And I appreciate that way of dialoguing, Liam. Thank you very much for the question. I hope we'll hear from you some more around here. Jimmy Aiken is our guest, and he likes mysteries. He likes weird stuff. And there'll be lots more weird questions for him to work on right after this on Catholic Answers Live. that's the music. When you hear that music, it's time for some Jimmy Akin answering weird questions. And I guess I kind of know how he got to have this reputation of being the guy that will answer the weird questions. Partly, I think he got that reputation just from answering them. But he did also create a podcast called Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. So there's that too. But
actually, if memory serves, we were doing weird question shows before I did Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World.
Oh, really? Oh.
I think so. Yeah.
Did you just know when you came up with the idea of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World? Did you just go, yeah, that's it? That's my, like, 'cause there must have been like different ideas thrown around or whatnot, and that one was, because it does seem like that exactly landed in your wheelhouse.
Well, I knew it was something that I knew mysteries were things I was interested in. And so it just seemed natural to, well, let's do a show about them and try to relate them to the Christian faith.
Huh? And now you're more than 300?
Yes, almost 400. We've got 400 coming up early next year, maybe even in January. I'd have to check.
And what's your percentage of regret on those? Are there any I wish I could go back and do that one? No? None?
Well, no, there are ones that I wish I could go back and, improve.
Oh, yeah.
There's none I regret covering. The one that I've identified most as one that I'd like to improve is episode 3, which was on Bigfoot. And I had some bad data at the time, and that affected the episode. But I have done multiple. I've begun doing multiple new episodes on Bigfoot with better data.
Oh, yeah, I see. All right, well, we'll go back to the questions. All the questions are in, and they are weird. And here's another. This one comes from CJ. I'm a Protestant listener of the Mysterious World podcast with Jimmy Akin and have benefited greatly from some of the information and knowledge from it.
Yay.
If healing can be obtained physically, does this damage the argument from miracles?
Psychically.
I beg your pardon. Okay, come on, Cyril. If healing can be obtained psychically, does this damage the argument from miracles for God's existence or for Christianity? One of the biggest evidences for Christianity has been the prevalence of miraculous healing throughout its history and the public healings performed by Jesus during his ministry. But could one theorize that he was just operating with psychic healing and that these healings through church history too were not necessarily divine in origin? Or is there some significant difference in psychic healing and divine healing that helps us differentiate from an evidential perspective? Oh, again, thanks for the hard work and high quality episodes.
Yeah, so this question is one that I think tends to occur to folks because of the, what's the right way to say it? Because of the largely secular approach that our society takes to things. We're living after the Enlightenment era, which really injected secularism into our culture in a big way, that kind of undid a lot of people's appreciation of the supernatural world around us. That's something that's new, thinking in human history, thinking about, everything is just natural laws, and maybe there's not a God who's behind things. Now, people of faith still carve out a special role for God, and there are good philosophical reasons for that, but they do tend to assume that other than that special limited role that God has, and Christians tend to confine that to Christianity, they tend to think of everything else as non-supernatural. But that's a new way of looking at it. And actually, the early Christians did not have that perspective. The early Christians recognized that there are spirits out there, and there are spirits out there besides God. So the early Christians didn't automatically dismiss it if someone said, Apollo healed me, or Zeus healed me, or things like that. They might say, well, your Zeus spirit or your Apollo spirit is deceiving you, but they wouldn't say he didn't heal you. So actually, from its dawn, Christianity was open to the idea of there are other things out there besides God that can heal you. It's not just God who can do this. But the Christian argument was that we have better evidence for Christianity than for these other religions. Because if you look at what's said about God, about Zeus and Apollo and so forth, they're morally inferior to God. Also, they can't be. You look at their biographies as gods, and they're not the creator. They're not the ultimate God. They're some lesser entity. And then we have the resurrection of Jesus to prove he's the son of the creator. So, and that's bigger than other miracles. I mean, you think about healing miracles. Well, okay, those are nice and they're good. But getting healed from being dead and coming back in a glorious form that can walk through walls and stuff like that, that's kind of a bigger miracle, especially when it happens in conjunction with prophecy. You know, God said this was going to happen, and then it did. That gives you pretty strong reason to believe in the Christian God. So Christianity has always been open to the idea of there being other things that can heal you, but the Christianity still has better arguments than other religions. Now, everything I've just said deals with Christianity and other religions. But what CJ is asking about is psychic ability, healing, psychic healing. And this is an idea that has received focus in the 19th and 20th century with the development of the science of parapsychology, which studies psychic functioning. And there is evidence that parapsychologists have pointed to say humans may have inbuilt weak, but nevertheless real psychic abilities that function intermittently and could play a role in someone getting healed from something. Well, taking an early Christian perspective of God isn't the only thing that can heal you, Christians wouldn't have a problem with, early Christians wouldn't have a problem saying, okay, maybe there, in addition to Apollo and Zeus, maybe there's also some inbuilt human ability that healers have that could be used. So they wouldn't have a problem with the idea of could there be a psychic ability. They didn't have the concept of psychic abilities the way we do, but if you explained it to them, they would say, well, sure, that's possible. The question would be, can you then differentiate it from healings that are done in religious context? So can you tell the difference between when God is healing someone or when God is involved in a healing and when it's just being done through this natural human ability? Well, just like Christians could differentiate between the miracles performed by the true God and the weaker miracles, you know, like the resurrection, and the weaker miracles performed by Zeus and Apollo, the Christians would say, sure, we can try to figure out ways to distinguish these psychic healings from genuine divine miracles. And in fact, Christians have explored that question down through the centuries. A notable moment in that was a publication by a cardinal in the 1600s named Prospero Lambertini. He was later elected as Pope Benedict XIV. So not the 16th, the one we just had, but the 14th. And he had been part of the congregation at the Vatican that looked at canonizing saints, and he wrote a 4-volume set about the evidences that can be used in considering a saint for canonization. And he was open to the possibility of what today we would call psychic functioning. And he actually set out criteria for distinguishing something that might be done by a medical cause or a psychic cause from a divine cause. And basically, the criteria were, if you want to certify that this was genuinely divine, you need to jack it up to do things, to show it did things that natural abilities are not reported to do. So like to rule out a normal medical cause, you needed to show there's no normal medical cure for this. And to show it wasn't just someone's psychic abilities doing it, it needs to like be instantaneous healing, because psychic abilities don't tend to produce instantaneous healings. Also, it needs to be a complete healing, and it needs to not return. Well, psychic abilities tend to be, you notice how I said the evidence that parapsychologists have for them indicates that these weak, unreliable abilities may exist. Okay, healing is one of those, but weak and unreliable are the important words. So if someone was able to do a healing on demand in conjunction with the intercession of a saint, you pray to the saint, you ask, please pray for my loved one here who's sick, and bang, they instantly get better. Okay, you've got evidence that the saint really was involved, or in the case of Jesus's healings, if Jesus says, I'm going to heal you now, and then he does, okay, that's evidence, and the person is healed completely and permanently. That's evidence that psychic function intends not to produce. And so you can distinguish a divine action in this case from a natural action of the same kind. I recently was writing about this. In fact, this is coming up in a couple of weeks on Mysterious World. I'm looking at a case of a man from Tennessee named John Hendricks, who he was Protestant, and he gave prophecies. And as you'll hear about in that episode, he predicted in the early 20th century some things that were not going to happen for 30 years. Well, okay, when I look at this from the faith perspective, I say it looks to me like John Hendricks had private revelation, because even though there is parapsychological evidence for some precognition in human beings, the evidence we have points to it operating on the scale of a few seconds to a few days, not 30 years later. And so if John Hendricks is making accurate precognitive predictions that weren't fulfilled for 30 years, that suggests something more than just normal human precognition. It suggests that God was involved in this. And in the same way, if someone is healed in a way that goes beyond what normal human psychic healers can do, that would suggest God is involved, and it wasn't just normal human psychic ability. So I think there are ways to distinguish these, and the so-called Lambertini criteria that were developed by the future Pope Benedict XIV are a good guide to some of that. And I hope that helps, CJ.
I hope so too, CJ. Thank you very much for the question. We got to take a break. Right back with more weird questions for Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Catholic Answers Live.
Do you have a question but prefer to ask it privately? Catholic Questions can help. Go to CatholicQuestions.com to ask your question online, email us, drop us a letter, or give us a call. Longtime Catholic Answers Live apologist and author Jim Blackburn or another Catholic Questions apologist will be happy to assist you. Catholic Questions proudly supports Catholic Answers Live, so visit us at CatholicQuestions.com today. That's CatholicQuestions.com.
Another great podcast on EWTN Podcast Central is Way of the Fathers. It's a podcast about the fathers and doctors of the church, the foundational figures of Christian history, hosted by Dr. Jim Papandrea. You can hear this and other faith-filled podcasts from our friends and affiliates around the world at EWTN Podcast Central. Visit EWTN.com/radio and click on Podcast Central today.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin here, having some fun on a Friday afternoon. At least it's Friday afternoon where I am. Maybe where you are, it's a Friday evening, or maybe even a Saturday morning. If our listeners in the Philippines, good morning. Happy Saturday morning to you. We got a bunch more weird questions for Jimmy to come. This one comes from Michael. Does your claim on Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 contradict this? Whosoever shall say that let us make man
Genesis 1:26, was not said by the Father to the Son, but by God to himself, be he anathema. I don't know what he's...
Okay, so I should clarify what Michael's asking about.
Okay.
First off, let's read Genesis 1:26. This is the verse that says, "Then God said, let us make mankind, or man, in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." The question is, who is God talking to when he says, let us do this? And there are a number of possibilities that have been proposed. One of them is that this is one of the members of the Trinity, like the Father, talking to the other two members of the Trinity. Another is that God's talking to himself. A third is that God is talking to his divine council, the group of spirits in the spirit world that God associates with him. And we see this divine council at various places in Scripture, like, for example, in the book of Job. The book opens with a framing narrative in which we're up in heaven and God comes in, and then all of these so-called sons of God come in. And these are high-ranking angelic creatures that serve as part of God's heavenly court. And so the third idea is that God was talking to the divine council.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the question then is, does my claim contradict this other statement? My claim, so let's be clear on what my claim is. My claim is that God is talking to the divine council, and he's doing it in a way that it's sometimes called an associative we that he's using. And that means he's associating other people with his actions, even though he's planning on doing it all himself.
Yeah.
It's like if I said, if I'm planning on buying let's say you and I are going out for dinner, Si, and I plan on paying this time.
Yeah.
And I say, let's get pizza. Well, okay, I'm associating you with my action of getting pizza, but I'm the one who's paying. I'm the one who's doing it.
Right.
But I'm associating you with my action.
Okay.
Okay, so the idea here, since Scripture describes, and Genesis 1 in particular, describes God as doing all this stuff, not the members of the divine council, God is using an associative we to say, let's make man in our image, but he's going to do all the work, which is exactly what Genesis goes on to indicate, that God does this work. And I think that is the logical interpretation of the passage, because that's what it would have meant to the original audience. You always start with, in interpreting a text, with what would it have meant to the original audience. Well, the Trinity had not been revealed at this point, so the original audience would not have understood this as the Father speaking to the Son. And since it uses a we, they wouldn't have understood, which is plural, they wouldn't have understood it as God speaking to himself. You know, we don't even they have a royal we in English, like when Queen Victoria says, "We are not amused," and she means I am not amused. But the royal we does not exist in Hebrew.
Okay.
We means we in Hebrew. And so that would indicate God is talking to someone other than just himself. And the logical solution is, well, he's talking to the divine council that is associated with him in heaven, and he's associating them with his action, even though he's the one that goes on and performs the action, because it goes on to say, and the Lord made man, male and female, he made them, and so forth. Or God made man. So that's my claim. Now let's look at the thing it is purported to contradict. It's a quotation that says, "Whosoever shall say that let us make man was not said by the Father to the Son, but to God himself, be he anathema," or let him be anathema. Does my claim contradict that? No, it doesn't.
Right.
Because what this is rejecting is that God was talking to himself. That's the alternative that's presented to the Father talking to the Son. If you say it's God talking to himself, well, I don't say it was God talking to himself. I say it was God talking to the divine council. So that's a matter that is not covered by this statement, and therefore what I say does not contradict it. But we can go further. Where does this quotation come from? Well, it's a canon that was adopted at the Council of Ariminum and Seleucia. Cy Kellett, drawing on your vast knowledge of the history of ecumenical councils,
lay it on me. I got this.
Are the councils of Ariminum and Seleucia among the 21 ecumenical councils that have been held?
They are not.
They are not. That is correct. So these are non-ecumenical councils. They are not capable of speaking infallibly, and they consequently do not have authority today, and provisions like this from them are later disregarded and superseded. So not only does what I claim not contradict this canon has no authority today.
Michael, thank you for the question. On we go. Jorge wants to know this. So I hear a lot about psychopathic serial killers. Where are you hanging out, Jorge?
He may be a true crime aficionado.
Oh,
There
yeah?
are lots of true crime podcasts about stuff like this.
All right. So again, Jorge says, so I hear a lot about psychopathic serial killers. These people,
Qu'est-ce que c'est?
These people, there's a little Talking Heads reference for those of you who weren't alive in the 80s. These people seem to lack empathy, don't feel remorse of any kind for the brutality they subject others to, and are impulsive. Without an ability to experience remorse for grave sins, are they incapable of being saved? How can we reconcile the gospel of Jesus Christ with such people?
Okay, so answering the question shortly and directly, because I can see we got the hard break coming up. Well, the Second Vatican Council teaches that this is in this is not in Lumen Gentium, it's in Gaudium et Spes. Specifically, it's Gaudium et Spes 22. It says that God has ways of making it possible for every human being to be associated with the Paschal mystery, by which they mean the saving mystery of Jesus Christ. So God gives every human the possibility of being saved, even if it's in a mysterious way that we can't perceive. So if someone has psychopathy, and that psychopathy has been great enough to lead them to serially kill people, well, that's a real burden, and that is they've committed grave acts of murder, but that doesn't mean they're unforgivable. They, number one, are dealing with a very serious mental condition, and that mental condition, namely their lack of empathy, which is what psychopathy is, their lack of empathy may mean they're not fully responsible for their actions, because one of the things you need is the ability to decide freely as a human action, as a morally responsible human action, to commit a particular sin. And these people have a psychological inability that deprives them of a substantial measure of the ability to freely consent. So they may not be fully responsible. But even if they are, God can still make salvation possible for them. So he may be able to reach them he is able to reach them on some deep level, even if it doesn't result in a visible change in their behavior. He can provide opportunities for them to repent of what they've done, even if it's on some deep level that doesn't manifest consciously. And that includes reaching them in their dying moments. You know, as the body is breaking down and the soul is starting to shake loose from the fetters of the body, there's a lot of reports of people having encounters with God and things like that, where they're, for example, given insight on their lives and able to say, man, did I mess up? So, they even talk about this is a known stage in near-death experiences of having a life review where you review everything you did and get an evaluation of it, where you yourself are evaluating what you did and can say, man, I messed up there. So if you have a life review and this is just a near-death experience, the person is in the process of dying and they conclude, wow, all those people I killed, that was horrible, I'm so ashamed. Well, that may be the kind of repentance they need before their death becomes full and final. And maybe that's one of the ways that God reaches people like this.
Jorge, thank you very much for the question about psychopathic serial killers that you spend a lot of time thinking about. I wonder if Jorge can face up to the facts or if he's tense and nervous and can't relax.
Ask David Byrne.
Jorge, thanks for the question. We're going to take a very quick break and be right back with more weird questions for Jimmy Akin. And if you've got a weird question for Jimmy Akin, when we come back, I'll mention how you might. Well, you know what? You can find Jimmy on the internet. He doesn't hide. He's out there for everybody to find. So send him your weird question. He'll collect it up. He'll get it to us, and we'll ask it on the air if it's truly weird. Right back with more after this. When the resurrected Jesus appeared to disciples on the road to Emmaus, they didn't recognize him until the breaking of the bread. The same is true today. In the Holy Eucharist, we really meet Jesus. In The Eucharist is Really Jesus, author Joe Heschmeyer explains how knowing Jesus in the Eucharist is the key to understanding all of Christian faith. Order your copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore.
Do you have what it takes to defend your Catholic faith? The work of apologetics takes study, practice, and skill, but more than anything, it takes spiritual strength. The Soul of Apologetics, a new prayer resource from Catholic Answers, gives you the spiritual tools every Catholic apologist needs: prayers, meditations, and scripture-based reflections to build up the interior life. Order your copy of The Soul of Apologetics today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore.
We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun, and that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron.
In terms of who made.
Okay. Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin, our guest, and it's weird questions for Jimmy Akin. And then here's a question about probably one of the weirdest episodes in the Bible. So I'm glad that Tony got this one to us. Tony says, Matthew chapter 27, verses 52 to 53 says, tombs were opened, and the bodies of many saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming forth from their tombs after his resurrection, they entered the holy city and appeared to many. What did the church fathers say about this? What did they do in their second stint on earth? Did their tombstones have both dates of death, etc.?
Well, I don't know how to answer etc., but I can answer the other parts. I get this question a lot, actually. And I understand why people are curious about it. Unfortunately, I can't provide super informative answers because we're just not told much about this. This is an event, for people who may not be aware, that's recorded in the Gospel of Matthew as occurring just after Jesus has died on the cross. And it's one of several events that Matthew reports of a startling or miraculous nature. So he says that the bodies of many saints, so that means more than one, and probably several more than one, holy or righteous people who had been buried in the Jerusalem area came back to life. And what did the church fathers, so let's deal with the questions. What did the church fathers say about these people? Almost nothing. If you check early patristic sources on this, and I have, there's almost no discussion, and they don't provide any additional information really. There are actually commentaries, like for example, the Ancient Christian Commentary, which is a commentary on the Bible made up of passages from the church fathers where they talk about the passage in question. So you can look up Matthew 27 and see exactly what church fathers had to say about different parts of Matthew 27. And here they say almost nothing and don't really have any additional substantial insight into this. It's just something that Matthew reports. What did they do in their second stint on this earth? Well, according to Matthew, they entered the holy city and appeared to many. And that's all we're told. So that's all we can say. We don't know anything else they may have done. I mean, they could have gone out for sushi, but there probably weren't that many sushi restaurants in Jerusalem at the time, and we don't know that they went to one. Did their tombstones list both dates of death? Well, that assumes they died again. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they were assumed into heaven. But assuming they did die again, did their tombstones list both dates of death? This is one we can answer. No, because they didn't have tombstones. The way burial worked in Jerusalem and its environ was, if you were poor, you would be buried in the ground. But if you were wealthy, and this would likely be a lot of these people, so they're not like clawing their way up from the earth, hands sticking out of the dirt. They would have been buried in tombs, particularly cave tombs. What they would do is you would die, and then they would put your body in a kind of a niche or bench in a cave tomb and seal it up and wait a year. And during that year, your body would decay to basically just the bones. Then they'd come back, they'd clean off the bones, and then they'd put them in a box known as an ossuary, which basically means bone box. And that would be your long-term storage. Now, we have found some ossuaries that have inscriptions on them that will say who was interred in the ossuary. Like, for example, we've actually found the ossuary of Joseph Caiaphas, the high priest who tried Jesus. But most ossuaries, number one, they tend to have multiple people stored in an ossuary, multiple bones for multiple people. But also, most ossuaries do not have these inscriptions. They didn't record names, much less did they record birth and death dates. In fact, a lot of cultures in this part of the world didn't really keep track of how old precisely people were. They didn't celebrate birthdays the way we do, and so they didn't keep rigorous track of it. It just wasn't something that they were that interested in. So at least this one, I can give you a pretty confident answer of no, their tombstones did not list both dates of death.
Thank you very much for the question. It's interesting to me that the fathers didn't have much to say about that, Jimmy. They just took it at face value.
Yeah, they didn't have any more information than we do about this.
All right, let's go to Wayne. Wayne wants to know this. In 1 Samuel and 2 Kings, there are descriptions of men killing their own babies and eating them. What is that all about?
Well, I'm not recalling off the top of my head a passage where men kill their own babies, but I do know that there are passages that record cannibalism. And cannibalism is a thing that can happen with humans. It is, and it's a tragic thing, but humans do resort sometimes to cannibalism in extreme circumstances. And so there were situations in the ancient world where a city would be besieged. Siege warfare is a tactic that is one where you basically surround a city and then starve the people out, unless you can find another way into the city. This way, you don't get a lot of your troops killed trying to get into a walled city. You just surround the walled city and you wait for them to run out of food and get desperate, and then they're easier to beat. And you may try other things to break the siege, like, using trebuchets to throw rocks at them and knock holes in the walls of their city and stuff. But basically, siege warfare is you surround them and you wait them out, unless you can find another earlier way into the city. Well, when people are besieged, they start running out of food eventually. How long it takes for them to do that depends on how much food they have in store and how well they manage it. By the way, if you are ever in a siege situation, Cy
Yes.
and you have nice big grain stores, do not burn your own grain stores. That's what some of the Jewish rebels did in AD 70 when Jerusalem was besieged. And they had several different factions of rebels who were jockeying for control of the rebel movement. And they thought, if we burn our food supply, that'll inspire people to greater devotion, because it'll mean we can't just sit back and relax for months. And we'll be desperate enough, we'll fight harder. Well, this didn't work out so well for the Jerusalem rebels in AD 70. So just a pro tip.
Important safety tip.
Yeah, don't burn your food supply. But at various points, people's food supplies would be exhausted and they would start getting hungry. And sometimes they would do desperate measures. Well, okay, who are the most vulnerable humans that you've got around? It's the babies. Human babies are more helpless than any other humans. And so in a desperate situation, they are the ones that hungry adults would pick on because they can't defend themselves. And so there have been situations where people have either the child has died for lack of food or they kill the child and then eat it. And this is absolutely horrible. But, people do horrible things, especially in extreme circumstances. And Scripture is simply being honest about that. Just like there have been other examples of people doing horrible things to children, including eating them in other periods of history. And all Scripture is doing is saying, well, the situation got so bad here that these people did that. And so that's what's up with that.
That's what's up with that, Wayne. Thank you for the question. Deacon Brian wants to know this. Not necessarily weird, but mysterious. Who was Peter's wife? And did he get along with his mother-in-law? Smiley face emoji.
Yeah, well, we don't know who Peter's wife was. We're never told her name in Scripture. I've seen some people argue, and this is a really bad argument, I've seen them argue that Peter was a widower since his mother-in-law is mentioned in the Gospels, but not his wife. However, that's really problematic because in 1 Corinthians, Paul talks about Peter and other disciples of Jesus traveling with women. And that the word woman can also be translated wife because they didn't have different words for woman and wife. It was the same word, just like man and husband were the same word. So that kind of complicates the old country song, if you want to translate it into Hebrew, of, I forget, the lyric is something like, normally I'm your husband, but tonight I'm going to be your man. Well, it's same word for man and husband in Hebrew and Aramaic and Greek, and it's the same word for woman and wife in Hebrew and Aramaic and Greek. And so some folks have said, Peter was traveling with a serving woman who would care for his needs, but was not his wife later. It's like, no, just stop it. He's got a mother-in-law. Paul later refers to him traveling with a woman. This is not some, female house servant that he's taken on the road with him. That of itself would be scandalous in the ancient world. If this wasn't his wife, it would be a scandal. So yeah, Peter was married. He had a wife. The evidence is that he traveled with his wife, but we don't know her name or anything else about her other than that she was Jewish and either from Capernaum or from Bethsaida, which were the two towns on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee that Peter was associated with. So that's about all we know about her. She was just an ordinary woman beyond that, as far as we can tell. We do have some indication that they may have had a daughter. Because there are some early church fathers who talk about Peter having a daughter. And sometimes they even give a name for Peter's daughter, but it's just like a feminine form of Peter. And that's improbable to my mind. Peter was the father's nickname. The daughter would have probably been born before Peter started active ministry with Jesus and started traveling everywhere. So I find it very improbable that if they had a daughter, that her name would have just been a female variation on Peter. In terms of did Peter get along with his mother-in-law? Well, so far as we know, she was living with him. That's reported in the Gospels. She was sick and in his house, and Jesus healed her and then started serving them. So other than once the sickness is removed, this sounds like a pretty functional family relationship. That doesn't mean they always got along. They likely didn't, because humans don't always get along. But that's what little we know about Peter's wife and mother-in-law.
Thanks, Deacon Brian. Got to take a break. Right back with more weird questions for Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
One of the biggest mistakes a Christian can make is to try to do good without God's help. St. Therese said, when we trust only ourselves and not God, our soul becomes incapable of virtue. Her remedy? Works of charity. And the greatest work of charity is to share the gospel. At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we encourage you to share the gospel with someone who doesn't know Jesus. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
Proclaiming the faith, changing lives.
The year was 2011. EWTN launches a new television network in Germany that will air Catholic programming 24 hours a day on one of the world's largest providers of direct-to-home satellite services.
To learn more about Mother Angelica's life and the history of EWTN, visit EWTN.com/Mother Angelica.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin, our guest, and lots of weird questions for Jimmy. This one comes from Mark. If there was an intelligent species on another planet, and if that intelligent life experienced a fall and was in need of a savior, and if God chose the same method of saving that species he did on Earth by sending Jesus, would Jesus then have two mothers? Mary and another woman God chose on the other planet?
Okay, so I'll answer this, but first I need to point out a few things. Number one, I'm being asked this question. I'm not volunteering an opinion without being asked. Second, the question presupposes a ton of stuff. Notice all the ifs here.
Yeah.
If there was an intelligent species, if this form of life experienced a fall, and if God chose to save them by sending Jesus, would this mean Jesus has two mothers? We've got multiple ifs here. So I am not saying that there are intelligent species. I am not saying that these, if they do exist, that these species have experienced a fall. I am not saying that if they experienced a fall, God chose to save them by sending Jesus to them. These are all being presupposed by the questioner. The reason I point this out is because whenever I answer questions of this form, and I have answered this question before, people just seem to forget all the details, and they trumpet it as, Jimmy Akin says there are multiple Marys in the universe. That is not what I said remotely. So if there is intelligent alien life, and if it's fallen, and if God chooses to redeem that alien life by sending Jesus to incarnate in their race, as opposed, for example, to just letting our version of Jesus redeem them as well as us, since his sacrifice was of infinite value here on earth. But if God chose to have Jesus appear incarnate on their planet and redeem them in a parallel way to what he did here, would that mean he has two mothers? Well, it depends on how strong the parallel is. Among other things, it depends on the biology of the alien race. Do they have mothers? Maybe sexual distinction never even developed on their planet. Here on Earth, life began with unisex organisms. That's what microbes tend to be. They don't have sex. They reproduce by mitosis rather than by sexual congress. And so we've got non-sexual organisms here on Earth. Maybe these aliens are non-sexual, in which case Jesus's incarnation might have a parent, but not a mother. Or maybe they've got multiple sexes beyond the two that we have, in which case Jesus might have something other than a mother. Or maybe God chose to just have him incarnate with no parent. He just materialized a body for Jesus. That's also possible. Well, okay, all of those are possibilities, but an additional possibility is if God wanted to make the parallel to what he did with us really close, well, then he could have picked a female of that species and had Jesus incarnate through that female, in which case Jesus would have two mothers. But that's up to God. That's not up to me. So do not go saying, Jimmy Akin says there are multiple Marys, because Jimmy Akin does not say that. Jimmy Akin is only pointing out what God's omnipotence is capable of doing. God can actualize any state of affairs by his omnipotence that does not contain a logical contradiction. God has lots of stuff in the universe he hasn't told us about, and one of those things is whether alien life exists. So if there is alien life, and if it needs a redeemer, and if God chooses to redeem them in the same way he redeemed us, and if he decided to do that with a very close parallel, well, then it's possible, meaning God could do this by his omnipotence, but I'm not claiming that any of this has happened because it involves multiple hypotheticals that I don't know have been actualized.
So what you're saying, no, I'm not, I'm not going to do that. Thanks. That was Mark. Yeah, that was Mark. Mark, thank you very much for that question. This one comes from Laura. Hello, Jimmy. I work with students of all ages, but usually those in their teens and 20s who are underprepared for college, and I am currently researching tools to help them overcome that inner feeling of not being good enough, which causes so many students to drop a class or even drop out of college. In my research, I've come across a lot of discussion about self-compassion and mindfulness, which comes from Buddhist philosophy, or at least the Western version of Buddhist philosophy. It seems to me that these ideas might be very helpful to students or anyone wanting to improve themselves, but I wonder how they fit in with the Christian tradition. Are there any pratfalls I should be looking for? Thanks so much. In other words, or to be more weird, can someone be a Buddhist Catholic or a Catholic Buddhist?
Well, let's deal with the last part of the question first. In the proper sense, one cannot be a Buddhist Catholic or a Buddhist Christian. Buddhism and Christianity are two different religions. They have fundamentally conflicting teachings. So you kind of got to make your choice. Are you going to be a Buddhist? Are you going to be a Christian? Or are you going to be something else? Having said that, can Christians, including Catholics, learn things from Buddhist sources? Well, sure. Christians can learn things from any source. This is something that has been part of Christianity all the way from the beginning, where Christians would recognize elements of truth in other cultures that had different religious beliefs, and they could adopt those. This is something the church fathers talk about. For example, they'll talk about how Greek philosophers have mistaken religious ideas, but that doesn't mean that Greek philosophy is wrong from front to back. There are elements of truth in it that Christianity can appropriate and strip of the mistaken religious ideas and then use in the service of Christian philosophy. This is, for example, one of the big things that was done by medieval doctors of the church, like St. Albert the Great and St. Thomas Aquinas. So in principle, you could look at ideas that a Buddhist culture has and say, okay, what here is good, what here is bad, and we could use the good concepts in Christianity. In doing that, though, I would say we need to be careful, and number one, that we really strip these of their Buddhist associations, because there's nothing distinctively Buddhist about having compassion for yourself or practicing mindfulness. I mean, Christians meditate. In fact, there's a whole instruction from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith from the 1970s on the Christian practice of meditation. So I would say if you're working with these students, if you feel they need to develop compassion for themselves, well, promote that, but don't say this is Buddhist. Or if you think practicing some form of mindfulness would help them, well, teach them that, but don't say this is Buddhist. Use it for what it is, a neutral idea that could be used by people of many different religious faiths. But in addition to how you present it as a neutral idea, there's also another thing that needs to be taken into account as part of the purification process. And that is, does it actually work? Because a number of years ago, mindfulness meditation became a big thing here in the West, and there were loads of programs that got started using it, and there was no scientific evidence backing it up. And later, when people started doing studies on mindfulness meditation, they started questioning and uncovering evidence saying, hey, this can actually cause problems for some people. It's not necessary, just because it's the big buzzword right now, doesn't mean, and it might sound superficially plausible as a way to help people. We need to look at the results and see, does it actually help people in practice? And I remember reading articles, secular articles, these were not Christian articles, but secular articles saying, hey, hold on this mindfulness stuff, we've got some reasons to question it. It looks like it may not just be a good that we can recommend to everybody. So I would say, as part of the purification process of these ideas, in addition to not presenting them as a religious idea, but as a neutral idea that can be used by people of different religions, we also need to look at the evidence and say, does this suggest that this practice would be helpful for these people? Because some practices are helpful for some people and some practices are helpful for other people, but not for everybody. So just like a doctor diagnosing, is this an appropriate treatment for you, you would need to discern, will this help these particular children that I'm dealing with? So in principle, there are things here that can be used, but I would strip them of the original Buddhist context, and I would also do research to find out, will they actually help the children I'm trying to help? Because helping the children is the ultimate goal here. And I hope that helps, Laura.
Laura, thank you. That'll do it for us, Laura, and appreciate you bringing your not entirely weird question. I see you tried to make it as weird as you could, but that seemed like a pretty straightforward question, and I'm very glad you asked it. If you've got weird questions, do your very best to get them to Jimmy Akin. He'll do his best to answer them, and we'll enjoy the weird question episodes when they come. Jimmy, thanks. I always enjoy the 2 hours with you. Thanks very much.
Likewise, my pleasure.
And that will Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World dropped this morning. A new one dropped. That's on the first guy to, I don't know,
Kenneth Arnold,
use the term flying saucer, but to give us the term flying saucer, Kenneth Arnold. And that will do it for us. We will see you tomorrow. Well, not tomorrow. We will see you next time we do this, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.